One of your colleagues has just actually asked me a very awkward question, which he's just Googled it for me. What does ESG stand for? I wasn't too sure myself. Do many of you know? You do? Go on then, what is it?
European Standards and Guidelines.
Well done. Yes. I could not. I just call it ESG, but it is, isn't it? European Standard Guidelines. But it's easier just to say ESG. We know what we mean on it, but that's exactly what it is. Yes. Okay. So I was going to carry on, and if you like today, I'm being quite informal. So I would just have a break every now and then, just for a few minutes on it, and we're aiming to maybe have some lunch at about 12:30 on it. I'm actually aiming to finish. I don't want to go right on to it, so I don't think we're going to we'll be finished. After lunch we may have another hour or so, so we'll certainly be finished by 3, if not slightly before. So if you have planes to catch or trains or whatever, we'll have plenty of time on. Okay, so onward. Now, ESG 2015 has replaced ESG 2005, and it was published very recently, just over a year ago, and it was agreed, like the Bologna Declaration, by the political at the political level, by the ministers of education within the EU. I don't think actually individual. If we had the ministers in here, we asked them, they probably wouldn't have a clue what QA is. And it was their office, their staff, obviously, but they nevertheless have to agree to it from a political point of view, which they did. Now, this is important to have a think about here, because those of you like me have been involved in education quite a long time. I probably longer than most of you, which is the word that we have, this word emeritus professor. I don't know if you use that in English. We use the word emeritus when I no longer do day-to-day teaching in Bristol. I'm still involved, but I still work within Bristol, if you take my point. But to take account, they make me an emeritus. I'm not too sure what that actually means. But it basically means that I no longer teach day-to-day, but I'm still there, if you like. Anyway, okay, let me get back to it. I'm only saying that because I have been teaching a long time. I've been involved in teaching and research almost since I qualified. And there has been, we use this English word, paradigm shift. It's a paradigm, it's just one word, it's a very useful word. What it means, a paradigm means when there has been a major change. A major change has happened. A paradigm shift means some things were done, and then for one reason or the other, things change. And we often call that a paradigm shift. Quite without thinking, it happens. And what has happened is a shift towards student-centered learning. The example I use for that is, like, I'm sure you will have students now working within groups. You set them a task, and the students meet small groups, and they will say, yeah, let's do this, let's read this, get some information, and they will then have to report on it. Students are involved in their own learning. Different words for that. In UK, we often call it DSE, which is a directed, because a member of staff is directing, telling them what to do. S, because the students are doing it. And DSE, it's education, DSE. But there's different words, but you know what I mean. It's students who get involved. And that, in the days gone by, you used to go to lectures, and the professor would come in and write everything down. There was no blackboard or any of these ability for students to look afterwards. You just had to write everything down and listen carefully. That was learning very much to do with the professor. Now it's changed. It is student-centered learning. So it's really important, I think, from a QA perspective, you do realise that things have moved on. Students can have the internet, they can look at whatever. Publications, your PowerPoint presentations are there. So they have a much bigger ability to learn for themselves than in the past. So that's very much a shift. And I think ESG 2015 realised that. We all realised that. So it was important that in the QA concept, in the ESG, it also has evolved to take notice of the importance of students in their own education on it. I just repeated that a bit now because it's an important point for those of you doing QA. You have to be fully aware of that. Now, ESG 2015, and I'm quoting from it there, is to provide a common framework for QA in Europe which will allow the assurance and improvement of quality. So assurance, it enables that QA is there, and improvement, that QA will carry on evolving, improving. And those are the two key things that I've talked before of to you. But again, when you do your SCRs and the different standards, be aware that you need not only to show that you have QA inbuilt into your program, but you have the ability to improve QA and think about QA in response to stakeholder input or whatever on it. Going a bit deeper into ESG, they claim in their document there are 4 principles you see. And the first one, it realizes that nations and states will vary, but it's the primary responsibility with the HEI, in other words, the vet school, it's the prime responsibility of the vet school for the assurance of their program, for both the quality and the quantity. It's your responsibility, that's their first thing. It's not their responsibility, it's your responsibility to actually do it. The second point, the second principle, is that the QA needs to respond to the different things we have. I mean, okay, we're vet schools, but they're medical schools, engineering schools, schools of modern languages, of Latin, whatever. They are different schools, aren't there, throughout higher education. And this is, it's got to cover it all. So the QA needs to respond to the diversity, the differences within HEIs, and difference in students as well. So obviously it's got to do that, but it has to be a common framework on it. The third principle is that the QA must support the creation of a quality culture. That it seems fairly obvious, isn't it, really? That whatever the QA is within let's say a vet school, QA, it must be central to producing the culture, the knowledge of QA within the school. And final point, principle, is a reactive one. QA must react. It must react to the stakeholders. Students, all HEIs have students, so they can safe to say that. But other stakeholders is more specific. And with us, the other stakeholders is the people who employ veterinarians, government, people in practice. And that's the reason why in EVE we have a close association with FVE, which are the which is really the practicing arm of our profession in Europe, FEE. So we have, the QA must respond to any thoughts, needs that these people say. And the society, I think that's really important in veterinary schools, because the QA must take account of, as far as veterinary schools are concerned, of the quality of education, because those veterinarians are going to be providing, either through farms or through pets, they're providing a system, but providing a service to the public. And so it's up to the QA to make sure that when Mr. and Mrs. whoever take their precious cat to the vet, that they are meeting a veterinarian who can respond to their needs and their pet's needs on it. So society with us actually is quite an important area on it as a stakeholder. Now, if you look at ESG, there are three parts to it. The first part is the one that you should be concentrating on now with your SCRs. So the first part of ESG 2015 is the one that you have to think about of QA in the different standards. And we'll be looking later at the standards in ESG Part 1, and I have the bits of paper that I asked you to look at, which is one of them is the ESG 2015 standards, and the other one is EasyVet SOP standards. Don't worry about it at the moment, we'll be looking at those in more detail. But make sure that that is the one, the part one of ESG, is the one that those of you doing QA in your SCRs need to be aware of on it and to study. However, be aware of the other two. Part two is basically covering the QA responsibilities of the experts. Some of you here, I know, are here maybe to think and to listen, to be an expert on visitations. Not all of you are, and I hope actually more and more of you. There are about over 200 people on the list with Eve as experts, but we really do need more. So any of you who would volunteer to be a visitor on will be very, very welcome, especially if you've got some QA, if you've got some QA experience, because the visitations in future, as we will see later, there is now a QA expert, and we need more QA experts. So you're going to have to volunteer on it. Anyway, that's what part two is. Part two of ESG 2015 covers the QA responsibilities of the visiting team. And then finally, part three, as far as we're concerned, covers the actual qualifying agency itself. This is what Eve should be doing, or any other quality assurance agency, either nationally, like your Spanish QA1 that covers all the universities in Spain, or Eve, which covers all the different countries in the EU. So that's in part three. So it's quite clear in the ESG 2015 how it's separated. But the one that we do need to think about today is very much part one. Now, if you have a look at the document, has everyone got that? This is the 10 standards, not the SOP one. Standards and guidelines for QA, ESG 2015, the third annex, summary list of standards. We have some spares at the back, I think, if people haven't got them. I just wanted to, I wasn't going to make lots and lots of slides of this. I just wanted to perhaps go over a few of them with you on it. But this, of course, is what you're going to have to be actually concentrating on. Right, so of their standards, I think altogether they have got 10, yeah. So the first one, Policy for QA. So this is what you have to make sure, that you have a policy for QA. By the way, I know I'm going through ESG 2015 now, but I will also be going through the Uppsala SOP standards for you as well, because in a way that is something you have to do now, those of you doing it for your SCR. But you have to understand behind the Uppsala SOP is this ESG. And some of them are quite similar. So first one, institutions should have a policy for QA that is made public. It is maybe on your website, certainly within your own university, everyone knows about it, students and staff. And you have to show that QA policy is considered part of the strategy, the mission statement, the objectives of your vet school. And finally, while involving external stakeholders, we talked about that, you have to show evidence that external stakeholders have had an input into your management of QA. That was a policy. 1.2, programs. 4 programs read veterinary curriculum. Now, all veterinary schools will have curriculum committees that will design a curriculum, will improve a curriculum, will change a curriculum. And these programs, I hope, should certainly have objectives set into them and learning objectives. What is a student with anatomy? Let's take anatomy example. At the end of the anatomy course, the students are assessed. What are the learning objectives? What do you want the students to have achieved in that subject? How do you know that they've achieved that level? By assessment. How do you know it, and what are the records of it? And so design approval of programs means that there must be a system within the school that the qualification from the program should be clearly specified and communicated. I think that's fairly obvious as well, both in the whole of the veterinary qualification as well as the individual bits of the curriculum. 1.3, we've just been talking about, haven't we? Student-centred learning, teaching and assessment. In other words, you've got to really show that the students are involved in their learning process themselves. And the assessment of students reflects this approach. Yes, students, when they do all these, their own bit of teaching themselves in small groups, how do you assess them? How do you know that they haven't gone down, in England, we would say down to the pub and had a drink with their friends? How do you know they've met? How do you know they've done that work? There must be a way of assessing that on it. So that is written into the 1.3. 1.4, of course, is another important one. Student admission. Institutions should apply predefined published regulations. Well, I'm sure you do. So if I want to apply to do veterinary science in Spain, there must be somewhere where I can see what qualifications I need, what standards I need, how easy is it to get in. You have private schools as well as public schools. What are the differences between them? So that needs to be put in there as well into your own SCRs. And SCRs will vary depending if you're a private school, and I know that Spain does have such institutions, and public schools. It will vary, honestly. And Eve have to take account of this, of course, in their own visitations. 1.5, teaching staff. In the, I'd say old days, but in days gone by, you used to actually take someone on board, appoint them. They may have PhD from this place, they may be boarded in this clinical speciality. So you appoint them. You appoint them on a Monday, and on Tuesday you expect them to teach. You assume that they can teach. You hope that they can teach. How do you know they can teach? Now, this has been quite a change on it in my own institution, and I'm sure within yours as well, that there are courses run. When we appoint a new member of staff, we expect them, if they haven't done already, to go to a course which is run by the university for all new staff, which they are taught some of the important principles of teaching. We have mentors for each one that will help that individual reach the capability of teaching. So if you do all these things in different ways, then that is where you need to show what you're doing in your SDR, that you are doing that. And having actually appointed them and been on a course, it doesn't stop there. There should be also, continuing education. How can you show that they have continuing education? It'd be interesting to know in Spain what your regulations are for veterinarians. In the UK, for us to continue to be licensed as a veterinarian, every year we have to fill in what continuing education we have done during the year, what courses we've been on, what we've studied, and if we don't do that, and then you may lose your license. Is there a similar system in Spain? No? So you can continue being a vet without doing any further work. That's not good. But still, that's just me saying that, sorry about that. But I think it is important, isn't it? I mean, once we qualify, the things changing so much. There must be a system. So if you do that, and you have staff who provide that continuing education to people, then that is somewhere where that would go in. 1.6, learning resources, student support. Obviously, this is where the finance, obviously learning resources, we have buildings, we have equipment, and we have animals. And it is important that in there, that there is appropriate funding for doing these things. It's not much use having a vet school that doesn't have enough money to provide sort of the clinical facilities and the animals needed for teaching. And student support, that's a very general term, but I'm talking about IT, I'm talking about the ability for Wi-Fi and the students to have access. Libraries are still there, but you know as well as I do now that libraries are often just used for somewhere quiet to work. They don't go there really to look up a journal, for undergraduates this is, because it's all available online. Why bother? I wouldn't do it. It's so much available online now. They can do it in their dormitories, do it. So, that in a way is also, next one, 1.7, information management. But now they are asking institutions, vet schools, that they do collect information right from admission, right the way through to students on their ability to pass exams, and do they all graduate? All those data. 1.7 is saying you collect that data and you analyze that data and you can publish that data, and if the data means you haven't reached your learning objectives or your number of students admitted or you're failing too many students or they're leaving the course, what are you doing about it? So you do need that data to effectively manage a course. 1.8 is public information. This is not only internally, you're publishing things for what is happening inside your school for your students. You can't, you know, students and staff need to know what's happening with management. How transparent are you in the work that you do in a program, in the institution? And that needs to be kept up to date, easily accessible. And 1.9, monitoring and periodic review. That's exactly what we're doing with EasyVet and Eve. So not only do you internally monitor, but in 1.10, you have external quality assurance with EasyVet. So 1.9 is more internal. You're doing it yourself. You're looking at your curriculum on a regular basis, and you're responding to what students tell you or ask you, or society, read stakeholders. And 1.10 covers quality assurance externally. In other words, EasyVet coming to visit you and to form an opinion on what you do. So those are all the standards. I've spent a little while going over them, but you can see how they will fit when we go over the Uppsala SOP later on today, which is the one that you need now to consider writing your SCR. But you must remember that that SCR very much comes, that SOP and the standards, we have 11 standards in the Uppsala SOP, it very much is based on the standards of ESG. Right, we've done that. Let's move on. Now, ESG 2015 has to cover institutions doing veterinary science, but it also has to cover institution doing medieval languages or whatever. It's got to cover everything. And so it is very, it's general. So it does not prescribe in detail what quality is really. It can't. I mean, we know what quality is in terms of our students. We like to think so. But so it is very, very general. But what it's there for is to provide guidance and indicating areas that are vital. And it's that area that has been taken into Uppsala SOP, specifically for vet schools. And if we were in this room thinking about QA in institutions doing medieval languages, they don't do medieval languages, no, or let's say modern languages. And then that is very much, they'll be discussing things in a totally different way. But nevertheless, they could use ESG 2015 to tailor it, to fit it into their own particular institute. I think ESG 2015 realizes this. And when you read it, it definitely recognizing the diversity of European universities. We cover a huge amount of subjects within Europe universities. And also it recognizes that QA agencies, such as Eve, varies from nation to nation, the national ones. So what it says, and I'll quote it from it, it says that a single monolithic, that's a very unusual word, I always think. Monolithic, excuse me, my students always used to complain that I would divert when I'm talking, when I'm lecturing, which is, try to keep them awake. But, monolithic, I don't know if anything, I'm trying to remember the name of that film. Do you remember there was a film, years and years ago, was it 2000 and something, where it was trying to explain what actually, how, in the film, how how humans evolved. And do you remember, suddenly, there was some, I think there were like monkeys, like chimpanzees playing, and this big stone appeared. Does anyone remember this? Or am I too old? You have seen this? And this big stone suddenly appeared in the middle of the land. And these apes looked at this stone, and what the film did, they suddenly decided there was one ape group fighting another ape group, and those that actually had some sticks, they beat them and got the water hole. Do you remember that? Anyway, and that was a monolith. That's what I would call a monolith, which is a big square stone. And I always remember that monolith, and that was just many, many years ago, and the filmmakers thought, that's it. I can't remember the name of the film, it was 2000 and something. 2001, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. And they remember then